All right, to start, let's turn to hymn number 642. 642 in our hymnals. I was unable to get the slides up this time, but that's okay. 642. Let the lower lights be burning. So I don't think I've ever sung this song at Keller before. Just out of curiosity, can you raise your hand if you know this song? Oh, wow, okay, perfect. I can lead it next time or another time I lead singing. Perfect, sounds great. Brightly beams our Father's mercy from his lighthouse evermore. But to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. Trim your feeble lamp, my brother. Some poor sailor, tempest tossed, trying now to make the harbor in the darkness may be found. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. I think that's a really great song to really help to emphasize what we're going to be talking about, which is evangelism. Because really we're all in our own ship in this great world. We're sailing about on different courses about our different lives and things. And as we go on sailing, we're going to accompany people who are in trouble, who are in danger of drowning. And as we're going, we have to make the decision, are we going to stop, get out of the boat if we have to, and save these people who are drowning? Are we going to take that leap of faith, that step of faith, if you could say, and get out of the boat and save these souls who are drowning? So that's a little bit of the motivation for what we're going to be talking about. Today we're going to be talking about the idea of gaining new prospects. And so we've talked about, the simple way of sharing the gospel. We've talked about maybe some questions that we might encounter as we're trying to talk to someone about the gospel. But what are really some ways of gaining new prospects, some new people to talk to? And so I want to talk about this evening some really simple and practical ways to gain new prospects. That's going to be the main point of what we're going to be looking at this evening. First, before we get into that, I do want to go back. I had a follow-on question from our previous class, which was on the challenging statements or questions that people have. And I want to address that in the first part of our class this evening. So one thing that I forgot to say is these challenging questions or statements, you actually don't encounter them as much as you may think. Most of the time when you're talking to somebody, I would say maybe 80%, I would say, you usually don't get into the challenging questions and things that we addressed last time. It's usually much smoother. You usually don't have to go about those. But again, we want to prepare ourselves for when we do have someone that brings up these challenging questions and statements. And so now what I want to talk about is you may encounter someone who is just plain sarcastic and rude when you start bringing this up to someone. They may say things, you're telling me you talk to that daddy in the sky, that sky daddy every day? Just very, very mean, right? Or are you telling me you believe in all those fairy tales, right? Some of the other statements you see, if you're really smart people outgrow religion, right? Or you still follow that ancient book written by goat herders that for thousands of years ago. Just really, really mean statements. And when you first hear those from somebody, initially you're probably going to be taken aback, like, wow, I can't believe someone would actually say something like that, right? Again, you are most of the time not going to encounter these type of people, right? But we do want to prepare ourselves. Because sometimes when you see or hear statements like this, you'll be shocked and not really know what to say in that situation. And so we want to go over what are some strategies for dealing with these sorts of individuals. So first, let's look at when Jesus was mocked. When Jesus was mocked, how did Jesus respond? Let's turn to Matthew chapter 27 and 29. Matthew 27 and 29. We read, when they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" It's pretty rude and mean as well, a statement to make to Jesus. What about a couple of verses down, verse 31? And when they had mocked him, they took off the robe that they had put on him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. So they are just continuing to mock Jesus with statements, with their actions, with how they're treating him, blatantly mocking him. And then finally, verses 41 through 44. Likewise, the chief priests also mocking with the scribes and the elders said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the king of Israel, let him now come down from the cross and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God." And even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. So even the robbers who were on the cross next to Jesus are still reviling him and mocking him for the things that he did. And how did Jesus respond? Oops, that one's cut off. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. I believe that's Isaiah. Joe, is that right? It's cut off there. Anyway. Okay. So, Jesus was silent. What about Paul? How did Paul respond in similar situations? Let's turn to Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. And let's read verses 32 through 34. And when they have heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. However, some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius and Areopagite, a woman named Darius, and others with them. Let's also read verse 6 in chapter 18. Chapter 18 and verse 6. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, "Your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." So did Paul make a point to stay and to try to answer all of these mockers and to try to do his best to to convince these mockers, these people that were flat out just not even listening, just mocking the things that he said? In this case, he didn't. I think that the lesson that we can take away from Paul and from, I think, also how Jesus responded, mockery is really the end of fruitful dialogue. When someone is just flat out mocking the things that you say, a lot of time, it's the time to walk away. If they're not even willing to respect you enough to have a dialogue with you and just openly mocking you, a lot of times, that's a good time to walk away. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you're having a discussion and things and you should want to be able to contribute, and maybe you have a counter argument or something, right? But when you just mock and maybe you just start name calling, right? We see this a lot in politics, right? Maybe one side just starts name calling when they don't have a good rebuttal to what someone else says. That's a good time to walk away. So real quick, just go over what this kind of speech usually says. It usually signals pride rather than curiosity. Someone who is mocking and making these sorts of statements, they don't have a desire to learn. They don't have a desire to want to know what you think. Just demonstrating pride. They have a desire to dominate the conversation, right? The name calling, the domineering effect. They want to dominate over you. They don't want to submit and listen to what you have to say. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, thank you. And that was Proverbs. What were the verse? Chapter and verse? Proverbs 9 and 7. Yeah, basically Proverbs is saying, don't waste your time on a scoffer. There are limits to us to who we should really spend our time having these conversations with. Yes, sir. Yep, exactly. Matthew 7:6. I think that one's coming up in some of the slides. Basically, don't cast your pearls before swine, right? It's a very, very classic verse when we're talking about these sorts of people. Basically, the main takeaway, right? We're not obligated to engage every person on their terms, right? I think it's our job to try to have a conversation, to try to start talking to someone about the gospel, to try to start those things. But when it takes this sort of turn, we're not obligated to continue if we're running into this scoffer and these sorts of individuals. So, here's a few other ideas that if you start encountering this with somebody, some statements that you might keep in mind when you encounter this. You know, if you want to have a real conversation, I'm glad to have one with you. But if not, I'm just going to step away. Right? If someone has that sort of attitude, that's a statement that you can make. Or you could say, I'm happy to discuss my beliefs, but not with insults. I'm not going to stand for being insulted. Mockery doesn't move us towards truth, so I'm going to pass, continuing the conversation. Talked about the Columbo effect, right? Here are some other questions that you might ask as a response. What made you so angry about your belief in God? You seem really angry. What made you so angry? That response could either get them to think or lead to more mockery and stuff. And so you probably need to have a follow-on response to that sort of question. Who taught you that Christians believe in this sky daddy that you're talking about, right? Where did you get that from? Have you ever seriously read what Jesus actually taught? You seem like you know a lot. Have you ever actually read it? Right? And as Brother Chris said, Matthew 6:7, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn them and tear you into pieces. Oops, I thought I had one more. Another response that you might say, another statement, something to the effect of, look, I'm trying to share with you something that is so special to me. This is the most important thing in my life. And I want to share that with you. Could you please just give me a little bit of your time? Because this is literally the most important thing, and I just want a little bit of respect so that we can try to have this conversation. Some sort of a statement like that might get them to, might humble them a little bit so that you can at least have a conversation. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next part of our study? Okay. All right, so on to the topic, continuing with the topic of evangelism, gaining new prospects. Colossians 4, 5, and 6 says, walk in wisdom towards those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So the phrase that I want to look at and kind of focus on and have in the back of our minds for the rest of our time together is this redeeming the time. We know that we all have only a certain amount of time on this earth, and we also all have a certain amount of time really to dedicate towards doing evangelism type things. We all have our own responsibilities towards our families, towards our jobs, towards things like that. And so, what are things that we can do that are the most effective uses of our time with regards to evangelism, with regards to trying to find people who you want to have these conversations with? I think that's a productive way of looking at gaining new prospects. So who remembers the story of Nehemiah? Anybody? Anybody remember the story of Nehemiah? It was, maybe you studied it a while ago. But Nehemiah, if you remember, he was in charge of rebuilding the wall, right? That this was after the Babylonian captivity, or kind of at the end there. And then it was Nehemiah that believed that, look, it's my job. God has assigned me that I need to go back to Jerusalem, and I need to rebuild the walls to rebuild and fortify the city, right? And so he asks God, and God approves of this. He meets with the king approves of this and gives them approval to be able to go back. And he brings a number of men with him, and it says their families as well, and they go back and they start to rebuild the wall, right? And at first, they have one strategy. They have a strategy that is really effective. They're going and they're able to dedicate their entire efforts to rebuilding the wall. They're using all their strength, they're using all their tools, everything that they're doing is rebuilding the wall, and they're making tremendous progress. But do you remember what happened later on? Who saw that they were rebuilding the wall? Do y'all remember? The other nations. The other nations started to get nervous, and they said, we don't like them rebuilding this wall. We don't like them that they're doing this. They're starting to become a great nation again. And so they felt threatened. And Nehemiah recognizes this. And so therefore, Nehemiah has to change his strategy. And so what he does is he arms every person working to build the wall. He says that every worker has their sword strapped to their side. He says that half of the people are armed and are prepared to battle, and then the other people are actively working on the wall. I want you to imagine a sword strapped to your wall, and I want you to imagine trying to pick up these boulders that they're being used to build the wall with the sword strap. Do you think that's going to be easier than it was in the beginning? It's not, right? If you're lugging around weapons, it's going to be actually much harder than it was in the beginning. But was that a necessary strategy change for the times and for the situation? It was, right? They had to pivot, they had to change strategies because of what was going on around them in order to be the most effective for the Lord, the most effective for their purpose of rebuilding the wall. And sometimes in evangelism, we have to do the same thing. Sometimes in evangelism, we might have a strategy that's worked really, really well, that for years we've held this one strategy, and we were able to convert a lot of people with this one strategy. But now we have to examine it, and we have to see, is this strategy the best strategy for the times and for the situation? Or do we have to change our strategy like Nehemiah did in order to adapt for what was going on around them, around us, right? Do we need to adapt for a different society, for a different situation? Do we need to still have the same goal, but do we need to change our strategy? I think we need to think about these things a little bit. What is the most effective use of our time? Every strategy that we employ is going to fall somewhere on this plot, okay? The y-axis, you have cost, and on the x-axis, you have time or people, okay? So this is kind of combined. There's only so much time, and there's only so many people that are able to do something. What strategy that you do, it's great if you're over here, if it takes a little time and little cost, but it's really effective, right? That's a really good strategy. Usually what I found is we're usually way down here. We like to focus on a lot of time and a lot of people, but little cost. That's usually the strategies that it seems like we employ, as far as I could tell. There are other strategies that are really expensive, right? Some strategies are really expensive, but then they don't take as much time and as much people. So it's kind of a balance between what you want to do. The other thing, similar plot, is you have people reached by the gospel on this side, and then you've got the resources used. You've got, time, people, and money, all of the resources used on this. What's great is we want to reach the most people with the smallest amount of time, resources, and money. That's the ideal, but a lot of times that's really challenging to do. It's really hard to get that, right? This is what I call quadrant one. This takes a lot of time, resources, and money. Sometimes we reach a lot of people. Sometimes we don't reach many people, right? Again, 3 and 4, quadrant 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4 all fall into this. What's great is if we're in quadrant 1 or 2, if we're reaching a ton of people by the gospel, but if we don't have to use as many resources. What strategies would fall into that category of reaching the most people with the fewest amount of resources? So that's kind of how I'm trying to think about it a little bit, of gaining new prospects. So, I think this is interesting. I found some survey results based on some various ways that we've tried to reach people in the past. And so note, this is from 2008. This was 1 year after I graduated high school, so it makes me feel old. But these survey results are from 2008, and I think they're really interesting to what this says. So, it's almost 20 years old, survey results. So, all of these are a survey of people, and all of it is based on their willingness to receive information through some sort of mechanism, okay? And so this plot, what is someone's willingness to receive information through a personal conversation with a friend or neighbor from the church that they're trying to talk with, right? 22% very willing. That's actually really good. 34% somewhat willing, 16% somewhat unwilling, and 27% very unwilling. This is actually the best plot that I'm going to show you. The personal conversation with a friend or neighbor, personal evangelism, is the most receptive way that people are to having a conversation about the gospel. And we're going to go over this a little bit more in more detail later. Willingness to receive information through a personal conversation with a family member. So actually this is the best one. Personal conversation with a family member is better, right? 36% very willing, 37% somewhat willing, 14% somewhat unwilling, 23% somewhat unwilling. So people are receptive to having these conversations with a family member, right? Which I think is good news. I think this is one that we could probably capitalize. Both of these strategies, this one as well as the previous one. We have friends, neighbors, loved ones, family members that we talked about in the very beginning, right? And if they're willing to have these conversations, let's do it. Let's go for it. Next one. Willingness to receive information through a visit to your door by a member of that church. Door-to-door evangelism. Door knocking. 7% very willing, 17% somewhat willing, 21% somewhat unwilling, and 55% very unwilling. People don't really want you coming to their door to talk about these things, right? Which is maybe a little hard to swallow, but it's just seemingly not a very effective way to gain new prospects. What about this one? Radio. How about radio? How about talking about spiritual things through the radio? 11% very willing, still not that great. 30% somewhat willing, that's better. 22% somewhat unwilling, and 37% very unwilling. So still not great results, right? Maybe that's a little bit surprising, that even listening to something over the radio doesn't seem to be a very great way of doing evangelism. Interesting. All right, what about a newspaper or a magazine? So remember, this is 20 years ago, right? Newspapers and magazines have changed drastically since then too, right? So again, 30% very willing, 33% somewhat willing, 21% somewhat unwilling, 34% very unwilling. So not super effective in that way either. What about email? People don't like you spamming their email, right? 45% very unwilling, 21% somewhat unwilling, 24% somewhat willing, and 10% very willing. My wife is an author, if you all don't know, and she has a bunch of email lists, and she tries to send out emails to various people to try to advertise her books. And it's very discouraging seeing the number of unsubscribes sometimes that you get when you have those email lists, right? And door hangers. This is something else that maybe people have tried in the past. Again, it's kind of a similar trend. Not great results using door hangers. Letter in your mailbox, about the same. About the same trend. Very unwilling, 36%, 19% somewhat unwilling. Y'all can read the numbers. Social networking website. This one was actually surprising to me. This is things like Facebook ads. This is things, social media advertising. 41% very unwilling. That was surprising to me. Now again, 20 years ago, maybe things have changed, but I thought that result was interesting. 25% someone unwilling, so over 50% unwilling. They don't like that. So this was another study that was done, and this one was more recent. I think this was 2024, 2025. No, I'm sorry. This is a summary. This is a summary of those results. Out of 13 approaches tested, personal invitations from family members or friends is the only method that a majority of Americans say that they would effectively draw them to the church. the only one out of all those that we went through. Talking, having conversations with family and friends. The only one over 50%. Visiting door to door received the least favorable reception. Just another conclusion from the study. This was one from a more recent study. This was 2025, I think. I think this is the 2025 study. Look at this. Approximately 85% of people who become a Christian do so through personal relationships, not mass media. 85%. That's huge. Again, that focuses on the personal conversations with friends and family, right? 85%. To me, that is one of the main takeaways that I got, is that is where I really think we need to be focusing at Keller for our evangelism strategy, is focusing on that 85%, Steve. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. That Steve says that basically getting people to start the conversation, to start that first time, you have that friends and family relationship. But these other scenarios of using these other means can use to encourage them to come back, to continue to have these conversations. Yeah, good point. The majority of new church plants in North America report that personal evangelism is their main growth strategy. That's the main strategy that new churches use. Another interesting thing is the use of social media has increased by over 300% in the last 5 years. 5 years by itself, 300% increase. So again, that doesn't exactly go with the survey results of 20 years ago, but of course, it was 20 years ago, right? So again, as I mentioned, my main takeaway, we absolutely must start and focus on evangelizing that people that we already know, who we have close personal relationships with. These are our friends, family members, neighbors. This is where we should start. Personal evangelism. If we want, I think that's a typo, not if we want to send souls, if we want to win souls as individuals, our main focus should be on personal evangelism. If you want to be a soul-winning congregation at Keller, our number one local evangelism focus should be on personal evangelism. Those are my main takeaways from those studies that I found. So, how do we do it? We need to build relationships with others that open doors. We need to get out and talk to our neighbors. I mean, I need to do a better job of getting out and talking to my neighbors, right? I live on a little cul-de-sac. I talk to them some, but I need to do a better job of going out and talking to my neighbors to try to build up those relationships so that I can start having these conversations, right? I don't know how many times, I think probably at least once a year, my neighborhood has a Facebook page that's just a neighborhood community Facebook page. At least once a year, someone asks, hey, is someone having a neighborhood Bible study that I can come to? Once a year, maybe twice a year, right? People are searching, people are wanting to have that community in their neighborhoods. We need to capitalize on that. We need to try to take advantage of that. We need to make new friends, right? Sometimes we like to stay in our bubble. Sometimes we like to not really go and meet new people. But we need to go and we need to talk to our kids' parents. If we're picking them up from school, if we're dropping them off from school, we need to start talking to these people so we can make new friends so that we can try to bring these people to Christ eventually. Same with our coworkers. Same with other people that we see literally every day. People at the grocery store, people at the restaurant. I know some people probably go to restaurants once a month and they probably have the same servers, they have the same people at the front. Let's be friendly. Let's be joyous. Let's show people what the love of Christ is so that we can start building these relationships with these people too. Ted, yes, sir.
Nothing I say do I wish to contradict anything you say.
Mhm.
But I would suggest that one of the components that's going to be required is the people that want to evangelize
Mhm.
have to develop a stronger desire to evangelize.
Absolutely. Mhm.
A personal experience in my past congregation, one congregation I was at, the preacher was not the best preacher in the world, but he came up with a lesson that he coined into a phrase.
Mhm.
And the phrase was the fragrance of Christ.
Mhm.
What in the world is that mean? You have to figure that out. Well, somehow or another, in his lesson, he got people thinking about the fragrance of Christ, and that's what they got hooked on.
Mhm.
And that whole congregation was a big movement for the fragrance of Christ, which developed their intent to share that with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ted says that one thing that I think we all need to develop better is the desire to evangelize, right? We all have to have a greater desire. And Ted said that there was a sermon that was preached talking about the fragrance of Christ that I think, if I understand right, the idea is that we want to enjoy that fragrance of Christ so much that we want to be able to go and share that same fragrance with those around us, with those in our community. Absolutely. We want to invite people to our home for dinner, right? We want to have these friends into our house for dinner so that we can start having these close personal relationships. Yeah. Mhm. Prayer, yes. Mhm. Yes, absolutely, yeah. Mhm. 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 Right. Mhm. No, it's a really good point. I had an entire lesson that I wanted to do on prayer's role in evangelism, was basically the comment. And prayer matters so much, right? And if we're praying about other people by name, right? And if we're thinking about them in our prayers and praying for them, naturally we're going to associate them more with Christian things and Christianity and our spiritual thoughts. And that will also lead us to more conversations, spiritual conversations with them as well as just with God's help and maybe giving us a little bit of courage, giving us a little bit of putting us in situations to help us with those. So yes, prayer is very important. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of bringing inviting people in your home
Hmm.
for dinner, I remember as a young child, my parents inviting friends over,
Hmm.
neighbors over to have dinner, and we watched the films.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And that, I think, opened up that conversation
Hmm.
without putting so much pressure on the person.
Right, right.
So with those films, that's what I grew up
Yeah,
watching.
yeah.
That's how we reached out to people.
Hmm. This is the Jewel Miller film strips, right? Yeah. So Sharon says she remembers having people in her home, her parents having people in her home, and they would come and have dinner. And then as a part of that, they would watch the Glenn Miller film strips, and that would just kind of open the conversation. It would be a much, maybe if you're not as familiar with being able to have those conversations and lead a Bible study, that allows you to have those conversations. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very effective way. As I say, my goal with this class, I don't want to say you must do things this way, right? I want to give you tools to where you feel comfortable to be able to go out into the world and be confident to be able to have these evangelistic conversations and things. I want you to grow and confidence and grow, maybe develop a little bit of skills in this, but really I want to give you tools to where you think you can do this yourself. Yes, ma'am.
Corey and Tanya Collins have some
Yeah. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. The cards that you leave, say, when you're paying for a meal or something like that, you could just slip that in along with your credit card or along with your tip at the end or whatever it is. Yeah, absolutely. Those are really, really good tools. This is one idea that's probably we're going to close with. I did want to. I have more to this lesson that will probably continue next week. Steve, if you bear with me for next week, if you're good with that. Um, this is an idea that I had. I just want to. I haven't done it, and so I don't have this is more of a hypothesis instead of a conclusive results, but I think it could be an interesting thing to do. This is an idea that I had called evangelism dinners, okay? So the idea behind this is you get three people or maybe three families or something together. The first person here I've called the pilot, okay? They're the person who is organizing the dinner. They're the person whose house you go to. They're the person who wants these people to come over to their home for dinner with the goal of trying to bring someone to Christ, okay? They're the pilot. This person is called the wingman, okay? This is someone who may be more familiar with sharing the gospel. Maybe they have a lot more experience than this person called the pilot and starting these conversations and trying to share the gospel with somebody. And they just have more experience. They're a member of the church. And so these are the first two people at the dinner. The third person, I didn't have a great term, so I call him the world man. So this is somebody who is still of the world, okay? This is someone who's not a Christian. And this is someone that the pilot has a relationship with. And this is someone that the pilot has known for a number of years, maybe 5, 10, 20 years. And we all probably know someone like this. They've known someone for many years, but they just haven't talked to them about Christ yet. They haven't had the opportunity to be able to share the gospel with them. And it might be a little bit awkward maybe if you say, look, this is the most important thing in my life. I've known you for 20 years, and I'm just now getting around to talking to you about this, right? Maybe it's a little bit awkward. But the goal is that the wingman, this person, you all come to dinner together, and the wingman just naturally brings it up because they've just met. They say, hey, do you go to church anywhere? Do you attend worship anywhere? Where do you go, right? I've really had a great relationship with Jesus, and I'm wondering if you have a similar relationship with Jesus. Basically, the wingman is the one to be able to just bring it up in conversation, to start the conversation with this other person who the pilot has this close relationship with the goal of trying to bring them to Christ. The result of this, it would be wonderful either if you could get a Bible study with the world man and then the other people by the end for another day, or if you can invite them to services, right? Those are really great results of this evangelism dinner idea. That would be the goal of something like this. I'd love to hear your feedback either now or afterward to see either if you've done this before or what you think of the idea. But again, this is just an idea that I had that maybe we could try to employ something like this. Nick? Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Nick says that basically, no matter what you do, your genuineness is going to be the thing that shines through, right? Kind of at the beginning when we talk to these people that are just super sarcastic and mean, right? If you have a genuine response to them, your genuineness is going to come through. And whether it's with that person or another situation, usually those go well. Is if you are genuine, even if you might not have all your words together, if you don't have maybe your entire thought process, be genuine and show them your love, and everything will go well. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, they don't know how much you know until they know how much you care. Yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, we have a whole nother set of slides, congregational evangelism ideas, just some things that I was thinking about that maybe we at Keller could work on. So if you give me 20 minutes, no, I'm just kidding. I'll let y'all out, but we'll continue on with this next time. Thank y'all so much for your attention and comments. I really appreciate it. So thank y'all so much. Have a great day. Thank you.